Hi, this is Jean Leggett from One More Story Games, and I want to give you an overview of StoryStylus. StoryStylus is our interactive fiction publishing engine, and we're going to go into greater detail in separate tutorial videos, but for now I just wanted to give you a sense of all of these tabs and how they help you create your story. So we're currently on the Case Info tab, and this is what your players will see as they're going through and looking at all the different stories in our marketplace. So here's the name of the story, the city that it's set in the time period, the number of players. We're working on a multiplayer aspect. And here's the synopsis, and here's the graphic that they'll see when they're choosing their stories. So if I scroll up here, you'll actually see the introduction from our playthrough video. This is our sample case called His Last Book. So this is the introduction, and we're going to show you in the detailed tutorial how you can create an introduction that's specific to the type of sleuth that your character chooses. For example, if they chose a doctor, maybe you show them an introduction that has autopsy report. If they choose a sassy nun, maybe you show them an introduction with a little bit more information because that sassy nun has greater empathy. And we do have entities that are linked in here and introductory clues. So we'll talk more about that in detail in the next video. We do have a language translation system that is built into StoryStylus that allows you to work with translators around the world and reach a wider audience. I'm going to skip that publishing tab and keep you hanging. All right, so we're going to move over to the text box. And this is actually where every single entity of text is visible from within the story. And you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of text. But think about it this way. This is the text of a description of a location. This is a text of the description of an item. This is text of dialogue within the story. So if you are working with a translator, that's great. They can go through and translate every element of your story word for word. And if you're doing a search for, I want to find all instances of Lynn, and I want to change her name to Miranda, you can do a search and replace all. All right, so I'm going to move over to the graphics tab. And in the graphics, it's pretty self-explanatory. These are all the graphics in the story. And you can see that in this particular case, there's 295. We have a lot of locations in the demo story. It's the one that's set in New York. And we just decided we wanted to put a lot of cool buildings in there. They are color-coded. You can actually also filter. I'm waiting for that to fully load up before it'll let us filter. But the green are for items, and blue are for locations. Red are for people, and the red are for people, and purple is for maps and whatnot. So, and you can search. It's a click and drag and drop. You can search and you can drag and drop. It's really great. So chapters is currently under development, but the idea is that you're going to be able to do intros to each chapter and outros. So intro, here's a little bit of information, sort of like your prologue to each chapter, and then the events happen in that chapter, and then you'll want to have something that summarizes the experience of that chapter. This would be more along the lines for somebody who's doing a larger story. You'll start to notice that we actually have author notes. These are notes that only you can see, or your collaborators. All right, so we're going to go into people. People is definitely a tab that we're going to do a couple of videos on. But for now, what I want to show you is, like, this is Lynn, and this is a description of Lynn, and this is the beginning conversation that we have with Lynn. So everything is actually adjustable in here. And we're going to talk about, in the more detailed video, what small talks are and topic talks. So if I quickly go over here, you can see all the people that Lynn is connected to that show up on the people relations wheel, and all the conversation that she has with the players. Now if I show you Dawn's, Dawn actually has quite a few connections. So spoilers. All right, so I'm also going to quickly look at the topics grid. This is where you would put in, if I ask Lynn about Dawn, she has questions about Dawn. If I ask Lynn about Pat, she has a response about Pat. So let's move on to locations. And locations is kind of neat, and it's another one that's going to require a couple of videos because we have the location itself. So here's the description of the location. Oh, look, somebody's put in an author note. This is where it belongs on the map. But what I really like are room locations. So for example, at the murder scene, which is Sherman Square, there is an inset map. So you can actually search room by room by room, and you're the one that's putting in those little dots that say this is the parameter. And then we have room hover, so I can actually, if I want to click on the couch, I might find some keys, maybe have to show the keys to somebody, and they'll let me know, who has recently been there and maybe some secret affair that's been happening. So I'm going to go into items, and items are pretty self-explanatory. I mean, there are items that we find within a story. So in this case, the murder weapon and, an empty brown wrapping paper and clues. This is also where we would find clues and topics. So that's where we would put them. They're hidden and then they become known at a certain location. Events is where we're going to find the information about the time of death. So this is a murder, time of death, author notes. So we're just going to open this up, and you can see that his time of death is very specific, 9:15 to 9:16. And if I move this over a little bit more, I can see that there's something called a vague start and a vague end. So typically what happens with police shows is you'll see that there's an approximate time of death, and then they're able to narrow that down. So as a story element, your medical examiner would say, well, I say he died between 7 and 12:30 a.m., and that's what would show up here. Later on in the story, when the information becomes known about the specific time, then that narrows. And you can actually start to see, there's somebody's alibi, and they will populate on here, which is seen in the event timeline in the game. So I'm going to move over to solutions. Solutions is for if you want to have a test at the end of a chapter or at the end of the story. So here are the questions. What item was Don Karstens murdered over? And then here are the options. And then who is the Snow Queen? There are the options. And then here are the solutions based on the answers. So you can actually say if they got 3 out of 4, but they missed who the murderer was, then they so close but wrong. Or if they get them all right, then here's the answer, and then they'll win a piece of memorabilia. So we can actually put in a little graphic. For example, in our APOC case, if you complete the case, you get a badge, and that will sit on your desk that is for decorating. So we do have something called flags, and that is keeping track of the current turn. And you're going to also be able to carry things over to series. So in story 1, maybe something happens and your flags are actually keeping track of the events that are happening, and they can carry over to story 2, which is a serialized version of story 1. We'll get into that in more detail. And a lot of the magic behind the scenes is through scripting. This is actually done with Lua. And I'm going to leave this. I don't want you to get freaked out because, I don't know, I'm not a programmer, but I know how to code websites. So I'm not too worried about that. But for example, if I get the answer to question number 2 and I choose 4, then that means I got that completely wrong. Or for example, what would be easier to explain it is, if I visited Joe's Crab Shack. Okay, if clue is known, then display this other clue. If this clue is known, then display this other clue. So the idea being that it's a series of if and then statements, and we have a tutorial system that's going to help you create this, and this is what will allow your story to be an interactive game. Please don't get overwhelmed. I know that's a lot of information to throw at you. But for now, let's get started with building a case, and we look forward to seeing your stories, and we're going to have webinars and tutorials to help you out. Thanks very much for watching, and we hope you enjoy StoryStylus. Take care.